disclaimer. Alrighty, hello everyone. For this video, I'm gonna be telling you the best combinations to do so far for BEYBLADE X. Since we've gone through July and August, we're gonna go through what are the best possible combinations, currently what are the good parts, kind of try to go through the tiering and all that stuff. And I will try to update this every month maybe? I don't know. We'll see. But let's get started. Obviously, make sure to check out mallabase.com, by the way. It is an optional way to support the channel. I appreciate any support regardless. We have some BEYBLADE X stuff on there. We have pre-orders up also, so make sure to check it out. To quickly give an overview, by the way, for how a BEYBLADE X Bay kind of works. So you have your blade right here, which is the main thing that is making contact in battle. And then after you have your ratchet, which is basically how many sides there are, how many points it can hit, and then after also the height. And then your bits at the bottom, which determines kind of, what movement your bays go through, and also I guess like the performance, right? So how this works, right, is that you have your blade, it locks into the ratchet, okay? And your ratchet basically has to turn for it to burst and to separate. Now what your bit is basically doing, so needle, high needle, ball, and regular needle have low resistance. And then after flat and taper have higher resistance because of this little cylinder part here. Now what that basically means is that if I have a bit with higher resistance, right? And take a little bit more in battle for this thing to turn, right? But if I have a bit with lower resistance, it's not going to be as difficult for the ratchet to turn in battle. So they've done this very smart for balancing sake. I think it's really good that basically the bursting is just really determined on the bottom and not on the top. Okay, now starting us off with our overview, we're going to be doing drawn swords. So obviously, drawn sword is pretty good for attack. I would say generally, it does not have the best of stamina. So if you're in an attack versus an attack matchup, you can deplete and kind of die. Also, I want to say that some of the main contact is obviously a lot of the sharp parts. Now, obviously, as you use it over time, it will wear down because fast metal hitting each other makes sense to wear down. So it does get a little bit more skill required to use as it wears down over time, similar to a situation of, let's say, Xiphoid. And it's a little bit annoying to try to rely on it because really its peak is when it's mint, and afterwards, it's still obviously very usable, just gets a little more annoying. 360 now is, it's a good ratchet. It's kind of a ratchet that I like to keep on using for a lot of my main stuff. So for specific setups, we'll go over it when we can. And then after the flat bit, so flat is your best bit for attack, I would say. It has incredible speed and aggression going over, the extreme stadium rails and slamming into opponents. Obviously, your stamina is not there, but your goal is to obliterate your opponent right away. So pretty solid, good burst resistance, all that stuff. So then after we have Hell Scythe. Now Hell Scythe, the best way to describe it is that it's kind of good at everything, but it's also incredibly inconsistent. But if you're able to use it right, you can pretty much do absolutely stellar results. No, the way that X works is that's not necessarily X over Y. It's more just the level of skill it takes to use something. But Hell Scythe does have some pretty good aggression slamming into stuff. Also can be able to be used for counterattack stuff, which I'll explain a little bit later. And the stamina on it, obviously this will vary on molds and everything, but how it usually wins stamina is that it just uses a lot of aggression to bully something and outspin than necessarily truly high stamina. But pretty solid blade. Feels actually balanced. Then after you have 460, which is more or less like the same thing. Anytime you're using something for 360, you can just use the alternate 460 if you're trying to make a deck or something. The only thing generally that I always say is that 3 sides versus 4 sides, I will always prefer 3 sides because 4 sides, there are more points for you to hit, and I have bursted a lot more with 4 than I have on 3. Obviously, this varies on ratchet to ratchet, but that's just my general preference. You then have to have your taper bit. So taper is pretty much able to do anything that flat can do. It just has a little bit less aggression, obviously, and a little bit more stamina. I like taper quite a bit because it gets you that control and aggression, so where you can actually slap opponents, but also be able to try to outspin them. Then after we have Wizard Arrow. So Wizard Arrow is a very smooth shape. I would say this has generally the highest stamina out of all the current blades released right now, and is also best for pure defense. Not counter defense, defense, or not counterattack, but like pure defense. Then after, yeah, in 480, it's just like a taller height ratchet. I'll explain what I like to use the taller height stuff for one specifically, but yeah, whatever. Moving on is just Ball. So Ball currently has the best stamina out of anything right now, and I would still say consistently is pretty good. Ball also, since we're gonna have to talk about Needle, it does have like okay kill resistance. Like I still feel like Needle and High Needle slide and die a lot less than actually Ball does, but obviously, you know, each thing has their pros and cons. Ball's still pretty useful. Now we have Night Shield. So Night Shield, very wacky shape. I would say this works best as a counter attack, and again, I'll be explaining after what basically counter attack is, but it does that job pretty well. It's able to really shut down, I would say, attack types once you get on a specific setup, and stamina is pretty comparable to that of Wizard Arrow, and overall, as an all-rounder, it is pretty good. Only really struggles, I would say, against like stamina slash defense stuff if you're trying to use it on an attack combination, but otherwise does fairly good. 380, yeah, just taller height, but 3 sides, so cool. Needle is a very tricky thing to talk about. I would say Needle is solid for defense. It is able to stick and sometimes take really, really big hits. But obviously stamina, it depends. You do have to obviously give a very good shoot and aim, but otherwise, yeah, pretty much solid, I would say. We have Dronzer S here, which basically for Dronzer S, I would say, with how the slope is and everything, once you get like a pretty good shoot on this is pretty good, I would say, for attack. This includes attack versus stamina or an attack versus an attack matchup, and I think overall does pretty good. You obviously have to have a good launch since there's a little bit of a weight difference, but otherwise I don't really think weight matters to like a huge extent in Beyblade X. Then after Night Lance is only really good for attack stuff because they decided to give a really fat gap to it and expose it like that. But what's pretty cool about it is that it's my favorite for attack. There are instances where it can slam down on something, cause it to burst. There are times when it can do some pretty good crit hits, and it's a little bit more reliable than a drawn sword because if drawn sword, you know, like I explained how the kind of wearing down, whatever, since it doesn't really face that real issue, it's a little bit more reliable right now, and I enjoy it quite a bit. Then after we have our first variant of a bit, which is High Needle. So it's just a 1 millimeter taller than regular needle. It has better stamina. I think it just can sometimes stick a little bit less to the big hits. I don't know, like more or less, Needle and High Needle are pretty good. I would say I lean towards more High Needle for more consistency because of the stamina on it. But okay. Now, for any setups that involve 360 flat or 460 flat, your overall most consistent blades to use this are Dronzer S and Drawn Sword. Then if you want a stamina setup or a taper use, you do Wizard Arrow on 360 or 460 taper. I guess you could also, if you wanted to, do like the taller heights. I generally just prefer lower height for like the taper stuff or even flat stuff. But yeah, Wizard Arrow is basically, it's just going to outlast at the end, not really like incredible for attack or anything. And then after we have Night Shield on the setup, so what Night Shield actually does is it's a very tanky bait, and while I don't think it's the best if you're trying to make this battle against a stamina type or a defense type, against like the attack type stuff, it usually has high stamina and enough defensive properties to be able to outlast a lot of the attack stuff and just take those hits. And then after, if you just want to do you know, pure attack stuff, you know, these give hits and these have slightly better stamina than flat. Obviously using taper. In the case of Hell Scythe and Night Lance, I prefer them to be used with taper because they feel a little bit more consistent than trying to use flat on them. And Drawn Sword is just kind of universal for attack, to be honest, so I'm just putting it there. These two really require, this one's not really needed, just because of the fact that they kind of deplete really awkward, or the hits are a little bit awkward to try to get with flat, but on taper you have control over those hits and useful stamina to try to win at the end. So for ball setups, I would say this one's just pure aggression, and this one is aggression and a little bit of stamina. Basically what this means is that it's just an aggressive setup where they use a lot of like impact, recoil, that type of stuff to bully a stamina type and outspin them. It's either the case of where they're just using a lot of attack power to outspin them, or they're using a lot of attack power to outspin them and they have generally enough stamina to hold out. then this one here is just pure stamina. And also, you know, generally for stamina, if you also want to use the taller stuff, I guess you can. It's not like it makes so much of a difference right now, if you're wondering. Then for pure defense, where it means they just take hits, Wizard Arrow on 460 or 360 needle works out perfectly good. Once the idea of counter attack, which now I can kind of explain what I've been trying to allude to this whole time. What exactly is counter attack, for those wondering? So counter attack is basically where it's a defense type, but the defense type can actually fight back quite a bit. So Night Shield can fight back quite a bit against attack stuff when you're using it on a defensive setup. Hell Scythe Low Height can definitely do this quite a bit. Bronze Sword can definitely do this quite a bit. And they just use a lot of aggression to fight against Bays, but also since they're kind of on like this defense setup, to manage to somehow outlast at the end. These two are also okay with high needle. Same with Shield if you want to do it in a low height, but the best example of pure defense is Night Shield on a high needle bit and on 380 because of the fact that it really goes crazy in the stadium. I prefer it with this taller height because the way that kind of tilts and slams into bays and manages to outspin them, it does it exceptionally well, and currently is the best defensive setup, I would say, for BEYBLADE X. So then after we have the tiering section, so essentially how this works is basically, instead of it being like this is better than that, generally, usually the lower you are on the tier list for I'm tiering this, is just the more skill that's required to use, because X is a little bit more on the skill and how hard is something to use to be able to get a win, I would say, than necessarily this is overall better than that. Now for attack versus attack, or AVA, basically like flat versus taper, flat versus flat. Minch Drawn Sword, because it's the most explosive and consistent, hard hitting, easiest to use. Then after, I think Night Lens can either be as good or very close to a Minch Drawn Sword. Night Shield is basically very good because it takes a lot of the big hits and can just outlast via stamina. Hell Scythe, if you can use the aggression right, can be pretty explosive, but it just depends. Then a Worn Drawn Sword, then a Drawn S, then a Wizard Arrow. And again, this just depends on how the blader can utilize it in an attack battle to win. For attack versus like stamina and defense, so flat and taper versus like ball, needle, high needle, etc. Again, Minch Drawn Sword at the top, Knight's Lance, Hell Scythe, a Worn Drawn Sword, Drawn S, and then after at the bottom, Night Shield and Wizard Arrow, just because they're very hard to use to get really consistent like KOs and attack work there. But yeah, again, all this depends on the skill of the blader to make this stuff as viable as possible for X. Then for pure stamina sake, it's either Hell Scythe could be at the top if you manage to use the aggression right, then Wizard Arrow, then Night Shield, and if you can't use the aggression right, then Hell Scythe I think goes right below, and Drawn Sword can go pretty much wherever here if you can use the aggression right. And then after, for counter attack, you have Hell Scythe, then Shield, then Drawn Sword. I feel like maybe Night Shield is the easiest to get the most consistent, at least when you use Night Shield in like a tall setup like 380 high needle. But yeah, these can just tire out your opponents with their aggression and try to outspin via stamina. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Then pure defense is just Wizard Arrow by itself. That's the only one. It really just takes the hits normally, like traditional defense. So if you wanted generally a good BEYBLADE X resource guide, I hope this video was able to help out. And every month we will try to do not only just general combo highlights, but also just general updates and maybe my thoughts, because eventually I have to do an actual tier list, but it's gonna be formatted a little bit differently. But technically this is like a tier list per month. But yeah, aside from that, that's pretty much it for this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. What do you like about BEYBLADE X so far? Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day and bye.